the Teaching Taxflow podcast, where the goal is to empower and educate you to legally and ethically minimize taxes paid over your lifetime.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Teaching Taxflow podcast. Today, episode 93. This is a hot one. Hot off the press, as we like to say. We are going to talk about, as it relates to your personal property, should you sell it or should you rent it? You've moved out, moved the family out, you've hit the road, moving into the new place. What do? We're going to talk about it. But before we do that, let's take a brief moment and thank our episode sponsor.
Hi, Chris Picciero here, founder of Teaching Taxflow, co-host of the Teaching Taxflow podcast, and pickleball enthusiast. Yes, if you listen to the podcast, you know almost every episode we talk about pickleball, the most popular and growing sport in America. We have tons of opportunities for paddles and pickleballs, but we don't have a lot of great gear on the market. Well, I'm so excited to announce that Sunsets and Dinks are now a sponsor of the Teaching Taxflow podcast and produce amazing gear, not only to look at, but you feel confident on the court. Because you are part of the Teaching Taxflow community, you get a 15% discount on all your orders with them. I know I love the gear I received, and I have quite a good record while wearing it, believe it or not, even at my level. Go to teachingtaxflow.com/pickleball and simply enter TTF15 in the serve up promo code area of your paddle rack.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. As mentioned, today I'm excited about this topic. I know I say that all the time, but I really am. This has happened to me a couple times where sometimes, something might look like a good idea, maybe in your mind, not on paper, but there's a lot more to it in some cases. So I'll kind of lay the groundwork for this, and then I will let my brother from another mother with no hair and all the tax knowledge jump in. But picture this, if you will. So, close your eyes if you want to, stare at the wall, turn on some whatever music. You have moved out of your home. You and your family have been in this home for X number of years, a certain period of time. We'll talk about that in detail. And now, for whatever reason, say you got a new career, job offer, new schools, better weather, you've moved out. You've got another property. You've moved into it. Again, personal property. So your personal primary residence, and you're stuck. What do? Do you sell it? Maybe the market's good, maybe it's not. Or do you rent your place out for some income? So, Chris Picciero, welcome back to your show, man. How are you doing?
I am great, John. Great to be back. Episode 93.
We've done a lot. There's a lot of these.
Guess what? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, boy. Here we go.
Do you know why the number... Well, we did this with 84, but do you know why 93 is a special number?
Because it's 7 shy of 100? I don't know.
No, it's the year I graduated from high school.
1893 was when you graduated.
Oh,
wow. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I've got wooden teeth. I've got wooden teeth that have stood the test of time.
Hey, you know what? Whatever you're using, I don't know what, face lotion you got going on, but you look great, man. You look great for your age.
John, at least I could play in the 100-year-old plus pickleball league. There'll probably be 4 of us, and I'll dominate. I got to play 100-year-old people to actually win.
And you know what? I'll leave the geriatric tennis jokes out of it. But you set that one up for me. But speaking of aging, right? Let's talk about this topic. So this one, I know this is one that we really just kind of threw into the mix because we get these questions all the time. And when we say that, especially on this one, it's not the marketing voice saying, "Oh, somebody asked this," but really it's us that want to talk about it. People really do ask this a lot. And again, people drive. But when I say people, our community members, Chris, obviously your private CPA clients, they drive the content that we do here on the show. And this one is no different. So a lot of people want to know this, right? And it's not a unique scenario. So walk us through this. Hopefully I did a halfway decent job of laying kind of the situation out as far as for somebody moving from their primary and then have this decision to make. So
this is an impromptu topic, and many people don't realize that we plan out our topics for quite a few weeks in advance. We book guests months in advance sometimes. This one just popped out of nowhere. It is weekly in our private CPA practice or in our Teaching Taxflow community that we see the question pop up. Hey, I'm moving. I own a property. It's been my primary residence, and I'm moving somewhere new. You don't even have to be buying in the new place. You might be renting, as you alluded to in the intro. And we've both personally been through this for a variety of reasons. should I sell? I'd like to sell my house my prior home, but if you are in the financial position where you don't need the equity from that house to move to the next place, you might want to rent it out. There are several tax and financial considerations that we have to look at. Most tax professionals would probably cringe at the idea of renting it out. And quite frankly, my default answer is sell it for the tax benefits, get the cash in your pocket, and move on. But there are other considerations as well. So let's first talk about the tax considerations of rent versus sell. So the first thing, the big elephant in the room, is then we have another shameless plug to episode number, I don't know, just listen to them all 90 plus of them, and you will find it. We talked about how to make up to $500,000 tax-free, but there's something called the Section 121 exclusion, and that allows people to exclude capital gains from the sale of a primary residence. If it was your rule of thumb, it was your primary residence 2 of the last 5 years, and there are some other special rules, but the vast majority of it is just, has it been your primary residence 2 of the last 5 years? For married filing joint couples, they can exclude up to $500,000 of capital gains. And for others, $250,000 worth of capital gains. So you have that right. But the problem is if you take your property, and let's say it was my primary residence for 20 years, and then I go rent it for 10 years, I've lost my maximum capital gains exclusion, my Section 121 exclusion. So and then I sell it 10 years down the road, now I'm going to pay tax on my capital gain instead of getting that money cash free. So Section 121, gold diagnosis in the teaching Taxflow system. If you rent the property, the time starts ticking on you taking advantage of the Section 121 or capital gain tax exclusion. If you just sell it and you have the qualifying time in the property, then you will walk away with a significant amount of cash, tax-free.
And Chris, it's, and this one, I guess, I don't mind sharing my situation a little bit on this too. So sometimes, like, for example, I bought a condo, got a really good deal on it in a not so great area in a city, and lived in it for a very short period of time. And then all of a sudden the market took off, where in that case, and in full transparency, I didn't know anything about anything when I got out of college, really, and rented that out. And yeah, the income was nice because if I remember right, it basically bankrolled my first employee that I hired for our marketing agency. And then, like, I kind of liked the landlord experience, but like you had mentioned too, on this and other ones, I think everything is situationally dependent. I gotta remember who told us that line, because I absolutely love it. It's not.
Oh, I know. It was Adam Whitney. Adam Whitney. He was not on. I was on his podcast. He's a CEO of a company that we work with. A great guy, a former military, was in real estate, and a former Michigander. But yes, anyway.
Well, now I can blame. Now I know who to blame when I tell my wife when she asks me to do something. I'm like, it's situationally dependent. I don't, and then she hits me with a spatula or something. But in all seriousness, right? Like, there's no playbook for this that's like, yes, turn right, turn left, rent versus sell a little bit, right? Like, everybody's situation is a little bit different, but it's so important. And again, why I'm so excited about this topic is it's so important to know what options you have before you're like, oh crap, I need to make a decision right now. Like, it's better to be able to plan for it, kind of arm yourself, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we both have. I had a primary residence that I took the Section 121 exclusion in. I had a primary residence that we ended up renting for many, many years. And I lost my primary. It was at a time in 2009, 2010 in Detroit that, quite frankly, we were upside down a solid $150,000 of equity. And I didn't want to have a short sale on my credit report. I didn't want to walk away from the mortgage. So I rented it out and ended up renting it out long enough to turn the tables. So yeah, we've been through this, but ultimately to walk away from the capital gain tax exclusion or the Section 121 exclusion, that's a significant thing to walk away from. So that's, so on the tax side, you've got to factor in the capital gain tax exclusion. Number 2, the rental income. Now, here's the cool thing is, with rental properties, you pay tax on your net rental income, not your gross. So, John, let's say you bought a property for $300,000. It's now worth $500,000. And you rent that property out for $4,000 a month. Well, you don't pay tax on $4,000 a month. You get to deduct any type of mortgage interest, real estate taxes. And you would think the tenant would pay the utilities, but you might have repairs and maintenance. And then you get a depreciation deduction. So you get to depreciate the property over 27 and a half years if it's a residential property. The land is not depreciable, but the building part is. But here's the catch. You have to take the depreciation deduction of the lower of cost or market, meaning even though that property is worth $500,000, you only get to depreciate $300,000 minus the land. That being said, it sounds like I'm talking about from both sides of my mouth, because I'm saying how it's great, great to sell the property versus rent it. But if you rent the property, my point is, if you rent the property, even though you might make a decent amount of rental income, let's say you make $4,000 of rental income and your mortgage payment's $1,500, you might net $2,500 a month. You're probably paying tax on very little to none of that rental income due to the depreciation deduction. And there's no coincidence. That's another one of the teaching tax flow laws. Cash flow does not equal tax flow, meaning if you rent a property for $2,500 net, that doesn't mean you have to pay tax on that $2,500. You pay tax on that amount after depreciation.
And Chris, too, before we dive too much further, just a quick question on my end, and I apologize if we're going to jump into this a little bit, but does it matter if it's converted to a short-term or long-term from a primary?
Right. No, great question, because we have a client that's converting their property to a short-term. It does not matter when it comes to the capital gain tax exclusion, because it ultimately comes down to that 2 out of 5 year rule. Now, the net rental income, if you are self-managing a short-term rental property, then it actually gets written off over 39 years instead of 27 and a half. That being said, you might meet the short-term rental loophole. Shameless plug on one of the episodes in the 70s, probably, maybe 80s, short-term rental loophole explained. And you might want to run a cost segregation study on the property. So ultimately, either way, here's what the takeaway if you're listening to this. You're probably not going to pay tax on your rental income because you're going to have a bunch of deductions. So another goal diagnosis, do you want to walk away with cash tax-free, or do you want to convert the property into a rental and potentially have income tax-free?
So that's the fork in the road.
Yes, exactly. Now, another tax consideration is depreciation recapture. And what that means, though, is, as I just mentioned, you get to depreciate, meaning deduct the cost of the property minus land over time. But if you subsequently sell the property, then you have to add that depreciation deduction back into your income. So, John, let's go back to our example. Bought the property for $300,000. It's worth $500,000. You rent it for 15 years and you basically deduct $150,000 of the $300,000. Your cost basis is $150,000. And let's say the property went up to $600,000, you'd sell it, you'd have to pay capital gains tax on the difference between $300,000 and $600,000, which is the sale price. And you would have to pay tax on the $150,000 of the depreciation deduction you took. So if you think you're going to sell the property in the next 3 to 10 years, converting it to a rental probably doesn't make sense. Now, how do you avoid the depreciation recapture? Do a 1031 exchange. Now, that's another episode. So, and I'm not trying to steer you to other episodes, everyone, but what I'm trying to say is there's typically an option if you make a decision or you intend to make a decision on a property, but talk to your tax professional. Don't do something and then come to them later and say, hey, I sold my property, I want to do a 1031 exchange. That's not how it works. My point is, once you convert it to a rental property, yes, the rental income is probably tax-free, but you definitely start losing some of your opportunities to avoid paying tax on the capital gain.
This week, down in Orlando, Taxposium, so the National Association of Tax Professionals, we're surrounded by fellow tax pros, right? And the hot topics are always, I'd say the past couple of years especially, is really tax planning and strategy. And obviously that's your specialty. So, by referencing all these other podcasts we have, I think if anybody takes anything from this, right, it's that there's just not a what do they call, like those switchboards, right? Like for phones. So anybody that's under the age of 40 probably doesn't really know what those. I mean, we didn't have to live through them anyways, but our grandparents probably told them, where it's really just moving pieces around to get the outcome that you want. There's just not a, bam, here's one strategy, here's the best outcome. It's layering them and really building them in together. And like you mentioned, right, there's ways to avoid the depreciation recapture, which some people might not even be familiar with depreciation recapture, which that's an oh beep moment if they're not familiar with that, right? They think you're kind of home free, and then all of a sudden, like, oh crap. But as you mentioned, right, you layer and you stack strategies and you can avoid it legally and ethically, right?
And exactly. You might have something called passive activity losses. I met with a prospective client today that had over $1 million of passive activity losses. So that will get utilized once they sell some rental properties. They have a nice portfolio of about 30 properties. So the thing is, they're going to have depreciation recapture when they sell one of the rentals, yet they have $1 million of other losses to offset it. John, you made a great point. It might be rare, but it did happen. But the thing is,
it's on record. A good point has been made.
No, you made a great point. And I think I should start emphasizing this more. Tax strategies don't live in a bubble. They are meant to be blended together. They are meant to be used together. And I think that one of the things we might work on in the podcast is maybe do an episode on our top 5 tax strategies to blend, because some of them work so well together. Like selling them, so like you said, there might be one thing that you do, like for instance, hey, you maybe have a big capital gain, but maybe you could harvest some capital losses somewhere else. So the point is blending some of these strategies together to get you the legally and ethically the best result possible is what's most important. In this primary residence conversion or sale could play a role. So on the tax side, let's think about the Section 121 exclusion, depreciation and depreciation recapture, and rental income. So and then that's on the tax side. Now, we talk about the tax tail not wagging the dog. So there are financial considerations. I'm going to get real personal here on one of the financial considerations as far as cash flow, right? Because we, in the current environment that we're in, interest rates are really high. And a lot of people have a mortgage. Like in our property, our primary residence, our mortgage rate's 3%. We've been here in about 8 years, I think. And or been in this property over 7 years, but been in Franklin over 8 years. And the thing is, the amount that we can rent a property in our neighborhood is excessively high. We're very lucky. And my wife and I were talking, and we built an apartment above our garage. John, you were a tenant in several times, and we look forward to. My kids call you one of the plus players, right?
Hey.
You're one of the plus players that come visit.
I think I was one of the first ones to stay there, right? It still smelled like paint.
Yeah, it did. Well, we thought you'd come and fix things up for us, but it was already good. And then I have a home office in this studio that we're recording in now. You helped set it up, which is amazing. But the point is, we built a 2-bedroom garage apartment, and it attaches to the house, but it can be locked off. It's about 1,300 square feet. And my wife and I were thinking, like, gosh, when the kids are older, we might actually move into this garage apartment. And let's say our mortgage payment was $2,500 and rent out our house for like $7,500 and net $5,000 a month, and then live here. So I don't have, because maybe I don't want to sell my house. Maybe there's non-tax, maybe there's emotional connections. Maybe we want to have the house when our kids start having a family, God willing. We've established so many deep relationships. We don't want to leave our neighborhood, but living in the apartment would give us opportunity to travel more. I could see in create rental income. So in other words, that's the cash flow part. If you can rent, if your property, let's say your mortgage payment is $1,500 and you live in a market that it's gone up and you can rent your house out for $4,000 a month, that's a significant amount of cash flow. And if you sell your house, and let's say you walk away with a couple $100,000, that couple, even though it's tax-free, that couple $100,000 generate you $2,500 a month in income. So the financial consideration is cash flow. Is there enough positive cash flow that sways your decision one way or another, if that makes sense?
We don't have to dive into this one in too much detail. Throw you a little bit of a curveball. Hopefully you're worried now. House hacking. So does that have anything to do with this at all, or that's kind of its own corner, if you will? Because it's not really a rental, but it is, right?
No, I mean, house hacking would play a role. That doesn't mean that that you lose all of your Section 121 exclusion. If you rent out a portion of your home and sell it and it was your primary residence, you still could have some depreciation recapture. It really depends on, are you renting out one bedroom? Are you renting out an ADU? Are you renting out a finished basement? So yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It just that's a whole separate episode actually that we can dive into that because it's a great strategy for people to create income, tax-free or tax-friendly income. Doesn't need to be a younger person, even a first-time home buyer, especially in those higher those higher ticket markets. When you're looking at a New York City or somewhere like that where they might have a finished basement or garage apartment. I mean, or the other options, we could rent out the garage apartment at our house and I move my office once the kids are older into the house. But this isn't about my personal life. This is about, but these are the things that you work through though. I think these are the things that anyone has to think about. Don't let the tax tail completely wag the dog. So
one day I'll actually stump you. My goal is to stump you in the next 3 months with one of my pop-up questions. I've yet to actually do it because you always got the right darn answers for everything.
Well, I'm just old. I've been doing this forever.
I know you're 118 years old, right? Isn't that what it is? 1893.
So I was one of the guys in our mastermind group, a friend, Matt Kidd, and I were I got part of a big discussion with CPAs, and I told him, I said, I've been doing this for 22 years, and I started when I was 10. I'm the Doogie Howser of tax professionals. No one bought me. No one bought that one. So let's think about market conditions, though, too. Because this is kind of the elephant in the room saying maybe you hold on to the property, but there's risk, right? Because no matter what, you want to sell your property at the highest price possible. And if you're in a property, even if you convert it to a rental and you feel there's a lot more room for the prices to grow, even if you trigger $200,000 of taxable income because the price or the cost of the property went up or the fair market value of the property went up, even if you take a quarter of that and pay taxes, you'll still have 75% of that. So you have to look at market conditions. Are you at the top of the market? Is it time to sell just because of that? Or are you willing to keep the property? And if it's an up and coming area or a growing area, and you might want to hold on to the property, even if the rental income's not amazing, because you might know, like John, you live in a downtown, quaint, very charming and nice downtown area of a smaller city in Michigan. Let's say 6 blocks away from you, they're going to build pickleball courts. And oh, by the way, it'll be quiet. So they're going to have some noise canceling things around it. So some people might look at that as a negative because they're going to hear that all the pinging. And those pickleball courts are going to attract a significant amount of people. Or maybe it could be anything getting built, right? It could be any development close to your house that's going to increase the value of your house. Even if you move out and if you could afford to, you might want to keep the house. So market conditions, cash flow, those are the two financial considerations. And quite frankly, we talked about long-term investment as part of market conditions, but finally, emotional considerations. And I got alluded to that as well. Like, we raised our children in my house. Do I want to hold on to it? I have a lot of close connections to people in our community. And if I wasn't in this community, it wouldn't be the same. I couldn't walk to the pool or drive the golf cart up to the front of the neighborhood, and I wouldn't walk our dog around the neighborhood. So that's those are things you have to think about that aren't related to tax. So you've got financial and emotional considerations and tax considerations.
Absolutely. And Chris, I know this is, one of the topics that we just kind of threw into the mix based off of a lot of interest in it. And you're right. I would love to do an episode where we discuss kind of our top strategy blending opportunities, and then a house hack one too. So there you go. Case in point, everybody that's listening to this, this is how we come up with topics. We just let them drive themselves and take the feedback from people. And, obviously we don't do this for our own good, although we do enjoy doing them. We love talking about these topics, and things change, right? So I know there's a couple of them on the radar here. Probably within the next 30, 60 days, we're going to look at kind of doing a version 2.0 of a topic that we touched much earlier on, that there's been some changes, right? So we keep people in tune with everything.
Absolutely. I think I did omit one thing that just popped in my head for considerations: managing the property. Is it something that you're going to manage on your own? What happens when you have a tenant with an issue? Are you going to hire a professional property management company? And then obviously that takes this little sliver out of your profits, although I'm typically a proponent of that. Can you manage it virtually? So those are, sorry, John, to go back into my considerations, but I felt like, gosh, I forgot something, and I actually did. So, but I agree. I'm looking forward to diving into the other topics. Yeah, absolutely.
And then obviously, though, if somebody does hire out to a PM's, a property management company, that's an expense, right? So it kind of, and that, I think something that we've talked about too on a lot of our episodes as it relates to real estate and rental properties, right? It's treating it like a business in a sense, unless it's totally passive. Obviously, that gets a little different there, but having all your ducks in a row, having everything planned out, because again, situationally dependent. I love that term. I absolutely do. It's fantastic. But then also, again, kind of harping on the point of kind of being armed, being knowledgeable of everything that's out there, and nothing against tax pros. A lot of great ones. I've met a handful of them, Chris, over the past 2-3 years, especially, that, not to say they don't know a lot, but sometimes people, as in a lot of professions, right? You get very used to doing the same things over and over again, same clients, same situations, etc., where, somebody might listen to this podcast and take questions to their tax pro, and their tax pro not really be familiar with it. So just a thought, instead of saying, hey, you don't know anything, you're fired, share this podcast with them. And it might, not to a fault of theirs or ignorance, we should say. There is just so much that's in those IRS tax publications that it's darn near impossible to know everything in there like Chris does. So,
I don't know everything.
On that note,
sure, but thanks, buddy.
Hey, you know what? You store knowledge very good. So again, I've never stumped you on one of my questions, which that's my goal. So, Chris, one more question for you on this one here, and then I'll let you go, and then we can wrap, right? So when would be a really bad idea or bad timing to convert a primary residence to a rental? I know we talked about a lot of the right things, but when would somebody really be making just the biggest mistake doing it, taking out the ability to manage it, etc.? But what might that awful situation look like?
I would say, so when you have a situation where you have a ton of equity in it that you could really use and deploy it into other opportunities. When you have a significant capital gain, let's say $400,000 or $500,000 that you could walk away with tax-free, and or if your property's in a market that could easily decline in value, and your rental income is less than 1% of the value. So in other words, there's that 1% rule. That's hard to get, but I mean, if you have $1 million property and you can rent it for $5,000 a month, that might sound super attractive. Let's say you only owe $2,000 a month, but hey man, I've got $200,000. You're going to get $5,000 a month. If you sold it and had $800,000 of cash, I'm hoping that again, if you gross $5,000 in rent, your expenses are probably a couple of grand. So let's say you're netting $3,000 a month, but your property's worth $1 million. I think you could sell it, take $800,000 and make more than $3,000 a month in some type of investment without the headaches of having the house.
Perfect example. There you go. You have it, everybody. Knowledge bombs have been dropped. And on that note, again, definitely be on the lookout for some great topics, not even just related to this, but just in general. I'm here looking at our schedule, and we have some awesome stuff on the roster, even going out almost 90 days. And we're coming up to episode 100, which we're going to start doing something cool come episode 100. We're going to tweak things a little bit. We're going to make it a little bit more interesting. But as always, as I like to close these out with, we'll see everybody back here next week, roughly about the same time, but a different topic here on the Teaching Taxflow podcast.
Investment advisory services are offered through Cabin Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cabin Securities, a registered broker-dealer. The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer of securities. Offerings can only be made through an offering memorandum, and you should carefully examine the risk factors and other information contained in the memorandum.